Sorry, y'all. I realized my mic is off. Good start. Good start to day two. So, welcome everybody to day two of the Afghanistan Symposium 20 years later. We're so excited to have you all join us again for the second day. We started off this symposium hearing from some amazing historians, kind of connecting us to the past of Afghanistan and what has led us to where we are today. Today, on day two, we'll be spending some time taking a slightly different look and investigating a little bit more about the culture and the media in Afghanistan and sort of how that has changed in the last 20 years. And so we're very excited to hear from our keynotes and our panelists and taking a different look, a slightly different look today about what happened in Afghanistan, and in particular, post 9/11 and after sort of the invasion began. So to introduce myself, my name is Omar Aziz. I am the director for the Middle Eastern Student Center at the University of California, Riverside. The Middle Eastern Student Center is a department on our campus who supports Middle Eastern, SWANA students at our university. And we are very lucky to have a space like this. Not a lot of campuses do. So we are located in, for those that aren't familiar, we are located in Southern California. So we thank all of you for joining us, for folks that are coming in from around the world. Today, I wanted to make sure that we also note that part of what we're doing today and what we hope to get out is that you know, a lot of folks may not be aware, but we are also doing some fundraising for scholars to come to the University of California, Riverside. So we will drop some links in our chat for those of you to have the opportunity to donate for the Scholars at Risk program. For folks who want to come here and study at our university, we're looking to raise funds for those folks alongside some of our campus partners. We also want to thank the Middle Eastern and Islamic Studies department at the University of California, Riverside for their work, for their generous work in making this a reality today. I also wanted to begin by introducing our amazing keynote speaker, Wazhmah Osman. So I'm actually very excited because Dr. Osman is somebody who I was able to connect with for the first time in a while, but I have been following their work, you know, for a good amount of time, and I'm so lucky that we were able to bring her here onto our campus. But Dr. Osman is an Afghan-American academic and filmmaker. She's assistant professor in media studies and production at Temple University. And her book, Television and the Afghan Culture Wars, brought to you by foreigners, warlords, and activists, she analyzes the impact of international funding and cross-border media flows on the national politics of Afghanistan, the region, and beyond. She's also the co-director of the critically acclaimed documentary Postcards from Tora Bora and the co-author of the forthcoming Afghanistan, A Very Short Introduction. So please welcome our wonderful keynote. We will make sure to have some time towards the end of our presentation for questions. For those of you in the audience, make sure that you are commenting and liking this YouTube video, and also using our hashtag that will also be putting into the feed as we're watching this. So I want to welcome Dr. Osman and thank you again for coming. And we're so excited to hear you for day two of our Afghanistan Symposium, and excited for hearing from you. So I'll pass it on to you, Dr. Osman.
Thank you, Marjan. So I think we can go ahead and put up my presentation, and let me make it in presentation mode, so it's full screen. So I want to start by thanking Omar Aziz and Ali Sadat at the University of California, Riverside Middle Eastern Student Center. They've managed to put together a very impressive and expansive, and I should say timely, multi-day event that covers the last 20 years of interventions in Afghanistan. I'm also happy to be in conversation later with panelists Mishgan Musami and Azita Atif to continue some of these conversations around media and culture and music and so forth. I'll try to keep it short as to leave time for discussion with Omar Jan, as well as to open it up for Q&A. As such, I'm going to highlight some key aspects of my book in regards to media, culture, gender, and nation building. I have about 20 slides that are going to help me to do so. So one of the questions that's often asked of me is what drew me to write this book? And I always answer that it has to do with the negative portrayals and representations of Afghans. From Rudyard Kipling to Winston Churchill, the prevailing images of Afghans as tribal, traditional, and barbaric are racist. These images have impacted...
Dr. Osman, I'm so sorry to interrupt you.
Yes.
I think we need to, I think the PowerPoint is not showing up. So I'm trying to, oh, there we go. So Ali, if you're behind, I know Ali Sadat is working behind the scenes. So Ali, is there any, were you running into this problem as well? If you can just chat me. So we weren't able to see it on the before. Now we do see it. So you want to try it?
I had it in presentation mode. Is that what happened?
I guess so. Yeah, that must have been. If you want to try it again, let me see if it goes back to the other. Yeah, for some reason it's going dark when you go into presentation mode.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay. So I guess we don't need to do that.
If you can do it, if you want to just do it in this way, in this mode, if that's okay.
That's completely fine.
Okay.
Yeah, no
All right.
problem. Let me just make that a little bit smaller. Okay. So as I was saying, from Rudyard Kipling to Winston Churchill, the prevailing images of Afghans as tribal, traditional, and barbaric are racist. These images have impacted my communities and me negatively. Afghanistan has been at the intersection of imperial ambitions from the 19th century Great Game to the Cold War to the current ongoing US Forever War. As such, via Orientalist and colonial mythologies, Afghans have been represented as backward savages, incapable of changing. Of course, this is not unique to Afghans. The dehumanization of Swana or Manisa, Middle Eastern, North African, South Asian people is also the case. And this is also what has happened to Indigenous and First Nation communities who are represented often as savages. And this is an image of from American Sniper, which is based on the true life story and memoir of Chris Kyle. And in the film, he is portrayed as someone with a moral compass, but this is a direct quote from him, which he says, "I hate the damn savages." And so I don't need to read the rest, but with the troubling rise of the draconian and misogynist Taliban regime in the 1990s and the attacks on the World Trade Center post 9/11, Afghan people were further stereotyped in the mainstream Western media and popular culture. In films, TV programs, documentaries, books, and the news, the focus was on repressive Islamic regimes without accounting for people's actual or potential agency. All Afghan women became extreme victims of backwards, misogynist Afghan men. Afghan culture was interpolated as static and fixed in time and with problematic traditions. Yet I knew by virtue of my background and experiences that Afghan culture, like any other culture, was and is dynamic and mutable. Shortly after the events of 9/11 in 2003, I started my graduate studies, first with my master's in Middle Eastern studies, and then later with my PhD in media studies. Um, so the goal with this book of mine, which now the title has been reversed: Television and the Afghan Culture Wars, um, um, which and this was based on my dissertation research, became to use an ethnographic approach to redirect the global dialogue about Afghans to local Afghans themselves. In other words, how do Afghan institutions talk back to discourses pertaining to them that have been reverberating globally on an unprecedented volume and scale? What do terms like conservative or progressive mean in contemporary Afghanistan or Afghanistan? How are charged issues such as gender and sexuality, human rights, democracy, and religion contested, framed, and negotiated by local cultural producers? This type of grounded work, along with a rereading of the archive, such as our wonderful keynote speaker yesterday does, this type of work naturally challenges the dominant and top-down view of Afghans as tribal despots who are incapable of modernizing and nation building. So yeah, this is just the table of content of my book, which I'm going to present a few aspects of. Over the last 2 decades, prior to the Taliban takeover, Afghanistan has experienced a surge in new media creation. Dozens of free broadcast television and radio stations, a fledgling internet infrastructure, and mobile telephone companies have been set up. Most of the funding for this rapid media proliferation came from the international donor community, including the neighboring countries and Western nations. I carried out over 100 formal interviews with high and low level media producers and government officials, as well as a cross section of Afghans. I also analyzed the programming itself while looking outside the box at the complex social relations, culture, and religious frameworks, power structures, and financial streams. So these are some of the media makers I interviewed. The two pictures on the left are pictures I took. And this is most of the pictures are mine. This is a picture I took as well. In television, the Afghan culture wars, I demonstrate how the international community's interventions in Afghanistan have resulted in media imperialism, as well as yielding positive media development projects, along with some problematic and misguided ones. The misguided ones include some women's programming, as well as drug crisis management, which audiences found to be too heavy-handed and naive, which I'll briefly touch upon later. But in the picture on the left, you see an American soldier guarding a telecom tower, and a number of these are funded by USAID. And the telecom towers are responsible for radio and television broadcasting, as well as telephone and internet and so forth. And so oftentimes they're guarded and protected. I'll also show a close-up of the bottom chart in a minute, since it's hard to see. So this is a chart from SIGAR, which is the Office of the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction. The office was mandated in 2008 by the US Congress to provide oversight of US construction expenditures. And they have exposed numerous cases of fraud and misappropriation of monies. But in addition to that, there's an ideological purpose for this type of media development. Having poured millions of dollars into media in the Middle East, the US government certainly wants to generate pro US content and ideology. However, local producers are mostly able to assert their own creative and political agendas. This is not to say that there are not egregious cases of media censorship and imperialism. There are. Most US funded Afghan television stations are incentivized not to cover civilian casualties, as well as other reports that portray the US war in Afghanistan in a negative light. However, I believe it is important to distinguish between the malevolent and the better ones, because it is in these spaces and gaps that the agency and freedom to deviate from the prescribed script and message can manifest and thrive. Which brings me to two concepts that I introduce in the book, and that's the concept of the imperial gaze and the development gaze. And I do so because I think it's important. These concepts are helpful for understanding the complexities of the merger between development and imperialism. Indeed, the development gaze and the imperial gaze are two sides of the same coin, with one ushering in the other. But at the same time, even though imperial interests undermine the altruism of development projects and nation building, as I said before, it is important to differentiate between the two. The danger with the imperial gaze, I argue, in addition to what I've written here on the slides, so those are some of the commonly pointed to factors of why imperialism is critiqued, including resource extraction and military and economic dominance and so forth. But what I argue is that the danger with the imperial gaze also is that it has merged with the scientific method, so that governance and science come hand in hand. And so, and it's created a rule of an expert class who uses science and technology to control and master society. And so the question is, wouldn't we want experts over non-experts to lead foreign development projects or governance more generally? And the answer is yes, but this coupling renders weaker countries such as Afghanistan as a blank canvas devoid of any history or culture, thus giving godlike powers to technocrats who, with a wave of their wand, can and have entirely remade, transformed, and slashed and burned countries. According to Shirley Membe, destroying infrastructure is a key aspect of rebuilding, as is building parallel but different structures for the elite and the rest of the population. Today, the US wields incredible power over all facets of Afghan life, including death, culture, and geopolitics. And some can argue this is still the case even after the Taliban takeover. However, Afghanistan's asymmetrical positionality is not simply one of unilateral subjugation. Rather, Afghans see themselves as neither victims or free agents, but as negotiators, diplomats, and hagglers who have always had to make tough compromises in order to maintain a shaky sovereignty. This is true of the media makers I interviewed as well. So getting into some of the programming, on the left you see these are all popular genres on Afghan TV. On the left are the foreign or collaborative productions. And on the right are local productions that are created with and without foreign aid. So also, while Afghanistan is awash in media from all over the world, American media products, for the exception of reality TV, are in fact not popular. The most popular media are local and transnational collaborative media, including B movies, as well as Indian and Turkish dramatic serials. Afghan people's need for justice via more serious programming and entertainment via more fun programs are not mutually exclusive. We cannot underestimate the value of entertainment in war-ridden countries like Afghanistan. Moving on to Indian dramatic serials. In the reception chapter of my book, I also show why Afghan women have not embraced the didactic Western-supported TV program about women's rights, but have instead found Indian and Turkish serials, as well as DIY Afghan B movies and homosocial all-women theater more liberating and enjoyable. So this is some of the popular series on, well, they were at the time, circulating the last 20 years or so. And the one that's on the bottom right is Khat Seom, which is the most popular of the original Afghan produced serials. For Afghan women who have faced victimization due to the rise of warlordism in the last 40 years, they are steeped in a misogynist world of, as I said, warlordism and Islamism, or political Islam. So when they are afforded the opportunity and privilege of consuming media, they want a media world that is the opposite of their brutal reality. While Islamists attack foreign soap operas on the grounds of immorality, their large fan base find them valuable for generating debates over domestic and gender issues at home and in the public arena. The gun-toting villains, who you can, for the most part, see in the three pictures to the right. So the gun-toting villains, who are usually sister, mothers, and aunts-in-law, are particularly enjoyable and empowering for Afghan women. These in-law types scheme against the protagonist couple in order to get their fair share of inheritance rights or other types of agency. These genres offer a subversive space where women can escape and challenge the male gaze and patriarchal social order and control. The Afghan women audiences I spoke to want a world where they are the heroes and saviors, a world where they not only have the power to save themselves, but also the nation. On the top left, you see Sabah Sahad, who is an actress, director, and police officer. She has created her own film franchise called Sabah Films. She has portrayed a powerful range of characters, including a general, a police sergeant, even a traditional horseback riding women warrior. Last summer, she was the target of an assassination attempt, but she survived it. Moving on to reality TV. These are all images from Afghan Star, which most Afghans are familiar with. Western media corporations and governments support these competition-based shows, and they attract large international advertisers. For example, large Western corporations such as Simon Cowell's Cisco TV and Sony Picture Television own the rights to One TV's Afghanistan Got Talent and Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. While the large corporate advertisers such as Roshan, an Aga Khan Fund for Economic Development owned telecom provider, supports programs such as Afghan Star, which is the Afghan format of American Idol, Pop Idol, and the X Factor. These are all from images from the documentary Afghan Star made by the British documentary filmmaker Havana Marking that focused on one specific season of Afghan Star. The ideology that underpins and frames reality TV pairs capitalism and democracy is mutually constitutive, one paving the path for the other. In contrast to the undemocratic patronage systems that sometimes sustain the political economy of some of these television productions, the televisual projections of these shows are characterized by celebratory messages of neoliberal capitalist entrepreneurship, equating voting for your favorite contestants with choosing elected leaders. So last but not least, to wrap it up, is the genres of news, public information campaigns, or public service announcements, political satire, and talk shows. Whereas the overlapping interests of Western corporations and international donor organizations are responsible for producing Afghan versions of Western reality television programs, locally produced political talk and satire shows are low in cost and enable smaller local businesses to advertise. But despite their modest production values, they are as popular with viewers and serve an important function. After experiencing 4 decades of war and trauma, Afghan audiences have very high expectations of media and journalism in general, and television in particular, due to high illiteracy rates. These audiences want television to bring justice and retribution to local and international warlords who have been sowing the seeds of war, gender violence, and sectarian strife for decades. With public service announcements, public information campaigns, the news, and political satire, media makers uncover, investigate, and expose corruption, abuses of power, and violence by local and international warlords and government officials. Of course, the future of all of this programming is in jeopardy now. But just quickly, the images that you see from left is a program called Niqab, or The Mask, on One TV, where women are given a mask to wear in order to protect their identity, and they describe, all types of anti-women abuses and misogynist types of, things that have happened to them, both domestically as well as, more in the public sphere and societally. The middle one is from a program called Open Jirga, or Free Jirga, which is on RTA, Radio Television Afghanistan, and is funded by BBC Media Action. I should say Niqab, which is on One TV. Some of those programs are funded by USAID. And the image all the way to the right, I think most people might be familiar with her, is Faranaz Faratun, who is a well-known talk show host and interviewer, and she freelances between different stations. So this is a program from One TV, but she also works for Tolo TV, interviewing prominent individuals, including warlord types. So in conclusion, I'm going to end, I guess, not on a very happy note, but after experiencing 4 decades of war, Afghans are traumatized and have high expectations of the media. My conclusion is that for the last 20 years, Afghan media producers were delivering and meeting those high demands. Without a doubt, the combined power of protests and broadcast media was an effective social tool for collective action in Afghanistan. Yet there was and still is a huge cost to this emergence and quick expansion of a public sphere. Violence against media makers continues to be a big problem, and now it's taken on, new aspects. They are subjected to threats, physical attacks, and death for providing people with programming they want to watch. If violence against media makers continues to increase without any real consequences, it does not bode well for the future of Afghanistan. At the time when I was doing this research, up until right before the Taliban takeover, censorship was already becoming a problem because it was becoming more and more prevalent among the media makers that I interviewed and worked with. But now the future of Afghanistan and the future of media are even more uncertain, and we can discuss this more in the Q&A. But my argument overall is that as a counterbalance to the government, warlords, and foreign interests in Afghanistan, the media is one of the key ways of bringing justice, debate, and healing. And now it's doubly important for the international community to put pressure on the Taliban to maintain freedom of speech. Thank you. So I will go ahead and let me just, I'll go ahead and stop sharing.
Yeah, that works. Thank you again, Dr. Osman. It was really great to see that presentation. I can say personally, seeing some of the images and the shows and the influence of the media, in the last 20 years or so, I can say, like, at my own household, right? Every time I visit my parents and my family, my grandmother, it's constantly on Tolo TV. It's constantly just shows or news, especially those Turkish serials. They definitely love those. So it's really interesting to see you talk about those and how popular they are amongst folks in Afghanistan, right? My parents and the folks that I'm interacting with are mostly people in the diaspora.
But I think you're raising a really great point, which is that they're equally popular with people in the diaspora, and in a way serve an important function of keeping people here connected with over there. I mean, not the programming that Tolo and One TV and ATN and all of them offer there and here is not identical, but there is a good bit of overlap.
Yeah, and one of the interesting things that I always hear from my family in particular, they talk about how any sort of progress or sort of, they talk about in particular, how well spoken so many folks that are on these newscasts and news channels are, especially sort of the youth and the young sort of generation of Afghans, and they often point to them, the men and the women, of just how impressed they are and kind of seeing that new generation. So I'll start with the question of just sort of like, what is that intentional? Like, have we seen sort of more focus on that sort of newer, younger generation to be kind of the spokespeople of Afghanistan? Do they just not want old people like on screen? Is it something that they just prefer? I'm just curious as to how that happened.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you're absolutely right in that there has been tremendous talent that has emerged in the last 20 years, a good number of them being younger people who have, taken classes and been trained sometimes on the job, sometimes through internationally funded training programs, and have really mastered their craft, be it being newscasters or talk show hosts or actresses or any of those things. But I also wouldn't say that there aren't older people on there, because a number of people I interviewed were of my generation, which is a little bit older, and kind of we grapple the pre-war and post-war era, and those people are really good in terms of connecting we're sort of in the middle, so those people are good at connecting the younger generation with talent from the past, right? So from the 60s and 70s, which Mijgan Moussami will be later talking about, when was the first sort of big moment for media in Afghanistan. And so we lost a number of those people, sadly, but there's still some people around. And so I think that a number of television stations were trying to make sure that their voices are heard and bringing them on to be interviewed, and also giving them positions, managerial and editorial positions to craft the next generation.
Yeah, and you talked about how there are folks in there that can connect and talk about the sort of time before the U.S. invasion, and make those connections for people. But especially in the last 20 years, how would you say television and media has contributed to that reconstruction, to what we see in the last 20 years of Afghan society? What would you say were some of the biggest contributions?
I mean, I think the contributions are immense, and that's, I go in detail and provide many, many examples in my book. But, put succinctly, or trying to summarize some key contributions would be in the genres that I mentioned, right? So particularly in the, the local Afghan productions of political satire, music videos, talk shows, the amount of conversations that are circulating and the debates that are happening around everything from human rights to Islam to different things is a real important contribution, because and in other instances they're also investigating and trying to bring some kind of justice for people who've been victimized by warlords. And in other instances, they're actually saving lives by, on the news, telling people to avoid certain areas because of suicide bombs and so forth. And so it's immeasurable. And of course, as I mentioned, you can't dismiss entertainment and the role of entertainment for people who have been so traumatized. Watching programming that helps them, bring some peace to them or gives them some hope, is really important in that respect too.
And a lot of what we see, from the media there, like what do you think makes Afghan media unique, maybe from other places or from other countries? Like, what is it about the media in Afghanistan that makes it unique?
I mean, there's many things that make it unique in terms of including, the funding streams, but beyond the unique political economy, one of the things that is very unique about Afghan media is that without having to pay for cable or satellite, because most people are poor and live in poverty, so they can't do that just on broadcast television station, just by owning a TV set, or you can rent it, or usually people watch it with an extended family. So one family member has it and all the other families come together. So just by having access to it, you can watch for free over 50 different channels. And on those channels, you have programming from all over the world, and so in media studies, we often define democratic media systems by providing diverse content, and also a lot of content. And I would say Afghanistan has been unique for that reason for the last 20 years. Now, what's going to happen in the future that was a big question.
Hmm. We're starting to get some questions in the chat as well, so I wanted to get a chance to read those. So from Sumis, wonderful and important contributions to help us contextualize the past 20 years of media making. Dr. Osman, given I think what they're saying, given the international and domestic concern over the place of women in the public sphere throughout the past 20 years and now, can you give us some examples of how Afghan women resisted stereotypes about themselves and produce alternate media representations? What do you recommend the diaspora might watch if things are available on YouTube or other places?
That's a great question too. Thank you, Mishkanjan. I mean, the women were both women media makers as well as women who were viewers and audiences were resisting the stereotypical representations of themselves as weak and victims and in need of saving, as has been discussed in academia. And some of the examples I talk about are Roya Sadat, who is the director of Khati Sewam. Those characters are all in difficult predicaments. It's about a group of people who live in an apartment complex, a group of people with very different backgrounds and socioeconomic positions in an apartment complex in Kabul. But they're all in difficult circumstances, the women, but they also have a degree of agency in that they're trying to, which reflect reality. Even in these dire times, the women of Afghanistan are being very brave and courageous and protesting against the Taliban. And then the other examples I have are women filmmakers, such as outside of the TV world, such as Sabah Sahar, who creates very popular, heroic, almost superhero-like women characters. So all types of things like that.
And you mentioned a little bit about how, talking about how women have challenged some of these stereotypes and, and resisted some of these portrayals. I wanted to also talk about, the Taliban sort of as well. And so talking a little bit about sort of the future of media freedom in Afghanistan. So like people's ability to continue these, resisting and creating these different portrayals of themselves. So despite the Taliban's like initial claims, they have continued their misogynist policies towards women and been trying to censor the media and just targeting violence towards media makers. So those people that are creating a lot of these, creating these portrayals and folks that are sharing what's going on. So given these developments, like what do you suspect for the future of media freedom in Afghanistan, since that seemed to have been a big part of the last, especially a couple of decades? What do you see for the future?
I mean, that's also a great question. And I think the future of media based on what's happening presently does not look bright. As you said, despite their initial claims, they have been censoring the media, and also, there's been reports of beating up journalists and, just in general, trying various methods to censor the media, as well as keep women out of certain jobs and participating in society and being full members of society. And so as to your question about what does this mean for the future of media, and I would say, the future of women's rights and human rights is that it doesn't look good. And I think the key thing that needs to happen is that the international community needs to pressure the Taliban, because they do have that power. I mean, currently they're withholding international aid that the Taliban and all Afghan governments have been heavily reliant upon. And so supporting people on the ground there, supporting women activists, supporting journalists with resources, with sharing their voices, all types of things, so that it doesn't go back to the way the country was under the Taliban rule the first time around.
Thank you. And we have another question. I wanted to bring this up from the chat, from the YouTube chat, if that's okay. So someone was asking, to what extent are Afghans critical about what they see on TV? Is it similar to the way, and they used in quotes, mainstream media is often criticized by Americans in the US? What is that dynamic like? So, what is, and I don't know, I think this question might be touching on sort of what is the level of trust maybe that people feel of the media? Do you have a lot of those critiques around the similar critiques that we see here about, mainstream media being, having some level of bias or kind of being, so I think that maybe that question of trust is part of what they're trying to get at here.
Yeah, I mean, people are critical and about what they see in the media, and they do express themselves, and I think that's unique to Afghan media and Afghan TV, is that there's a lot of mechanisms for feedback because it's such a, or at least was, I should say, such a media boom and media proliferation with so many different channels. In order to stay relevant, television stations had to regularly solicit people's feedback, including live shows where people would call or text their feedback, and they would actually listen in order to stay relevant. So, one of my arguments is that the media system resembled more of what we call a public interest model of media, as opposed to what we have here, which is a commercial model of media, which has embedded bias because of corporate monopolies, right? And so there's corporate media monopolies that existed as well. And some of the people I interviewed were critical of Tolo for a variety of reasons, because they were more popular and had more market share. And then there's also the issue of sectarian TV. So sometimes people will watch TV according to, religion and race and ethnicity and all of that. But overall, people have a very wide and varied media consumption diet, I would say, which makes it for, more well-rounded viewing and view of the world.
And kind of relate, what is access like for people to watch these? Like, are we, like, what, does it differ sort of depending on where folks live? Like, what is people's access to these television programs look like for folks in Afghanistan?
I mean, if the Taliban do not, or they don't remove the telecom towers, or attack them, or get rid of them, which they were before they were in power. Maybe now they'll realize they need it in order to communicate now that they're in a governance role. But if they Wait, I'm sorry. Can you just repeat that? I think I
Yeah, no, I think I'm just asking like what does access look like, or maybe
Oh,
and maybe
yes.
yeah,
Yes.
like in the
So,
whether it's
yeah.
the last 20 years and maybe what you see it might look like moving forward as well.
Yeah. So I was saying with access, if they keep the telecom towers, there was a good infrastructure where most people in urban areas had access, and even in some rural areas, people had access just by virtue of renting or owning a TV station. Like I said, you could have access to many stations. Where that wouldn't necessarily be possible in a lot of developed countries, including the US. You'd have to pay for services and pay for, high speed streaming and so forth. So the access was pretty good. I mean, the future depends on. I don't think they're gonna. I don't think it's not in their best interest to continue attacking the telecom towers. But at the same time, if they go back to something like Sharia radio, which is what they had the first time around, and banned all other media, I think that would be very difficult for them as well, because I don't think it's a completely different Afghanistan and different environment than when they first came to power in the mid 1990s. People would not stand for it, and I think that's what I was saying earlier. We need to support, reformers and activists and leaders on the ground there who are in a precarious situation with whatever resources we can, and pressure the international community and governments to support them as well, in order to continue these uh, media developments and human rights projects going into the future.
And we have another question as well from Adam Tyson. So they say, so wonderfully informative. Thank you so much, Dr. Osman. You mentioned political satire. What has satirical programming looked like in Afghanistan over the past few decades? And is this, I know there's Shabake Khanda. That's, I think there was like one that's like
Yeah,
a variety show, but I know that there's some sort of political satire that they tend to include as part of it, right?
yeah. So Shabake Khanda is definitely one of them. It's a great program. Then there's Zang Khatar was another one. Talak, so Zang Khatar and Talak were also political satire shows. Almost all the different stations have created their own um, original programming around political satire because it has become popular. And the best way I could describe it would be, like you said, a comedy sketch, like Saturday Night Live programming, but more with an undercurrent of politics and commentary. It was really a great development that was happening, because some things that they could perhaps not say on talk shows, they could get away with in the guise of comedy, including commenting on, international interventions and so forth.
One of the things that also reminds me of is, and a lot of times there was, sometimes a lot of the most of the people on that show were, I think, were all men, and so I'm wondering kind of how sort of gender is played out, and how that looks in the media in Afghanistan. Like, I distinctly remember oftentimes men dressing up as women in a lot of these shows, and so could you talk a little bit about that, and that dynamic that also exists?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you're pointing to is with Shabake Khanda and some of the other ones that have the cast are mostly men, if not all men, that they, as you said, dress up like women. And some women have complained about the representations of women in these, cross dressing situations that they're not very positive. I mean, I would say that their characterizations of most people are not positive, because that's what they're, exaggerating in order to make a commentary. But in terms of gender roles and gender deviation more broadly, I would say what I witnessed in the film sector in Afghanistan, outside of television, as well as in the all-women theaters of Afghanistan, you see a good number of women dressing up as men, and also, gender transgressing. I think these are all positive developments, because it enables a type of commentary and moving away from the norm and questioning of strict gender codes. I think all of this is going to be very hard to carry out with the Taliban's strict dictates on men and women. I mean, of course, Afghanistan is a gender segregated, or what's called a homosocial world, but we'll see what happens. But I thought those were all positive developments that were happening. Although some of the things like the all-women theater have a long history, way before the last 20 years.
So I know that we're hitting the hour mark, and we're going to continue this conversation. I know we wanted to maybe even talk about some foreign media and how and their influence in Afghanistan. So maybe we can save that for tonight's panel and bring that up again. So I wanted to end with the question of maybe just asking you maybe what you're hopeful for, or what we can maybe look to or pay attention to kind of moving forward, with Afghan, media.
I mean, it's hopeful that people on the ground there, people who are in Afghanistan, who are in very dangerous situations, are fighting back and protesting. The media is still trying to report truthfully on what the Taliban are doing. And there's been numerous protests by all different political parties and reformers and women's groups. All of that's hopeful, just like the media was hopeful in the last 20 years. I think the part that's not so hopeful is that, without support and resources and the international community stepping in to diplomatically, I will say, nobody wants more war, diplomatically stepping in to, pressure the Taliban, hopefully to some kind of transitional government and then elections. Ideally, things are going to become, very difficult again for reformers and media makers.
So thank you again. There are things I hope that that we can look to as hopefully that the progress and changes that have been made can help us understand and look to the future and hopefully reveal things that are going on. Continue that hopefully commitment to bringing us what's happening in Afghanistan, and we can continue watching that and observing what's happening, hopefully for good things.
Thank you, Ahmad. I look forward to continuing this conversation in the panel later.
Yeah, so we will continue this conversation tonight. So this was Tuesday's keynote discussion. So I want to thank again Dr. Wazhmah for presentation, for taking questions. I want to thank folks for joining us from the audience. Please make sure that you are following us on Twitter and on Instagram to get all the updates and to see what's happening and what's going to be coming up on our schedule for the Afghanistan Symposium. I want to also make sure I plug the crowdfunding campaign that's happening at UC Riverside. So once again, we hope to bring scholars from Afghanistan to UC Riverside. We've been able to get contributions from the university, and I know a lot of other campuses have done similar efforts. So please, we ask that you all support this effort to bring scholars here to continue their studies, continue their education, and we can support them in their efforts and contribute to in any way to helping them succeed educationally. So I want to thank folks for doing that. Please check out the link on our YouTube page for the crowdfunding campaign to get more information on it. And once again, we will see you all tonight with our wonderful panel with Dr. Majgan Masumi, Dr. Azita Hatef, and Dr. Osman will be back. So we are very excited for tonight's panel and look forward to speaking to you all and hearing from you all. So I want to thank everybody for joining us today. And I will see you soon later this evening for our panel. Have a wonderful day.